The Wild West wasn't just shootouts and cowboys. Real towns were chaotic, dirty, and full of weirdness that Hollywood ignores. From absurd laws to exotic animals running loose, dive into 24 strange but true facts about what it was like to live in a real Wild West town. Subscribe and turn on the bell for more hidden truths from history. Number 1. It might sound weird, but towns like Dodge City and Tombstone had stricter gun control laws than a lot of places today. When you crossed the town limits, cowboys and travelers had to hand their revolvers over to the sheriff or leave them at the stable. Signs at the entrance made it crystal clear: no guns inside town. If you broke the rule, you'd pay a fine or go straight to jail. The famous gunfight at the Corral, for example, started for that exact reason, because the Clanton brothers refused to disarm. The truth is, those frontier towns ran with more order than Hollywood wants us to believe. Police records from back then show that murders were a lot less common than we imagine. Number 2. Before saloons became those wooden buildings we see in the movies, most of them were nothing more than old, reused circus tents. The owner would stretch the canvas, stack up a few empty barrels, throw a plank on top, and boom, the bar was ready. The whiskey served there was so bad that guys would mix in pepper and tobacco to cover up the taste. Now, picture what it was like outside. In Tombstone, Arizona, the streets were covered in a thick layer of horse manure. Even when it wasn't raining, it turned into a sticky paste that felt like mud. The smell was so strong that visitors reported feeling sick before they even got off the stagecoach. That buildup drew thousands of flies and spread diseases that killed more people than shootouts. Number 3. Here's a detail about the Old West that not many people know. In a lot of mining towns, business taxes were based on how wide the front of the building was, not the total size. So what did owners do? They built buildings that were really narrow up front and long in the back, like a hallway. In Virginia City, Nevada, that created a pretty nasty side effect. The gaps between buildings got so tight, they turned into dark alleys nobody wanted to walk through. People dumped trash back there, set up makeshift latrines, and the smell was so bad, those alleys got the nickname Outhouse Alley. It was literally a maze of stench right in the middle of town. One simple tax law ended up shaping the entire layout of a town in the American West. Number 4. Fort Griffin was in Texas and had a nickname that said it all: Babylon of the Brazos. It was the kind of place where you could get shot just for looking the wrong way. The town grew up around a military post, but it quickly turned into a hangout for buffalo hunters, pro gamblers, and working girls. Doc Holliday lived there for a while, and it was in Fort Griffin that he met Big Nose Kate, the woman who would stay by his side for years. The card tables ran day and night, and arguments over marked cards ended with somebody on the ground. The law existed only on paper, because in real life the one in charge was whoever drew faster. Few places in the Old West had a reputation as rough as that one. Number 5. In 1856, the United States Army came up with an idea that sounds like a joke, but it was totally real. The Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, yes, the same guy who later led the Confederacy, talked the government into importing dozens of camels from the Middle East to haul supplies across the deserts of the American Southwest. The operations base was at Camp Verde, Texas. The animals worked well, carried more weight than mules, and needed less water. But when the Civil War broke out, the project was abandoned, and the camels were basically turned loose in the wild. For decades after that, ranchers and travelers in Texas reported running into wild camels, roaming the backcountry, spooking horses, and causing general confusion. The last confirmed sightings happened around 1941. Number 6. Abilene, Kansas, early 1870s. Two cowboy saloon owners decided to hang a sign with a bull on the front of their place. The problem was that the drawing showed the animal's anatomy in a way that made the whole town uncomfortable. People complained, and women refused to walk past it. The tension kept building until Wild Bill Hickok, who was the sheriff at the time, ordered the painting to be changed. The owners did not like that order at all. What started as an argument over a sign ended up escalating into armed confrontations that left two men dead. Think about it. Two people lost their lives because of a drawing of a bull. It shows how in frontier towns, any disagreement could turn into a tragedy in just a few minutes. Number 7. Bodie, California. Once had nearly 10,000 residents at the height of the gold rush around 1880, with dozens of saloons and a whole community built around the mines. But when the gold ran out, people just left, abandoning everything behind. Houses, shops, churches, everything got frozen in time. The crazy part is that Bodie became known as one of the most violent towns in the Old West, with shootouts and brawls pretty much every day. Today it's still standing as a ghost town preserved by the state, with personal items still inside the homes, like the residents walked out yesterday. Dozens of other towns met the same fate across the West, but Bodie is the one that best shows how the promise of wealth could build up and wipe out an entire community in just a few years. Number 8. This one will surprise you. In Evanston, Wyoming, local authorities decided to ban the sale of soda with ice cream on Sundays. The reason? Sunday was the Lord's Day, and a fizzy drink with ice cream was considered too indulgent. But shop owners didn't just take it. An ice cream shop owner came up with the idea of serving ice cream with syrup on top, without the soda. And to avoid upsetting churches by using the name Sunday, they changed the spelling to Sunday. Yep, the sundae you order at a diner was born from a moralistic law in the old American West. Laws like this existed in several states and showed how religion dictated even what you could eat on an ordinary Sunday. Number 9. Tombstone, Arizona became famous because of the gunfight at the Corral. But not many people know the town had some pretty weird rules about appearance. During the 1880s, some local churches wouldn't let men in if they had a mustache. The logic was simple. Back then, a big, thick mustache was a trademark of card gamblers, gunmen, and saloon owners. The pastors didn't want that kind of figure mixed in with families. The problem was that Tombstone was already split because of the political tensions left over from the Civil War. This ban just poured more fuel on the fire. Men who wore mustaches just because of family tradition felt humiliated and pushed out of the town's community life. Number 10. Deadwood had a serious problem that not many people know about. The town burned down so many times that residents already expected the next fire as part of the routine. The Gem Theater, one of the best-known saloons in the area, was destroyed by fire 3 times, and every time there were suspicions that someone had set it on purpose. The question nobody could answer was simple: who benefited from the destruction? Meanwhile, officials tried to keep order with curious laws, like banning dancing after midnight and closing saloons earlier to avoid trouble. But in a town built almost entirely out of wood, the real threat never came from bar fights. It came from flames nobody could control. Or maybe that someone didn't want to control. Number 11, the showdown at the Corral wasn't just a cowboy fight. Behind that 30-second shootout in 1881, there was a quiet war that went back to the Civil War. The Earp brothers had roots in the North and served the Union. The Clantons and the McClorys, on the other hand, had Confederate sympathies. When those families ended up in Tombstone, Arizona, the old war wounds were still wide open. The town was split. On one side, lawmen tied to the Republican Party. On the other, Democratic ranchers operating near the Mexican border. Disputes over stolen cattle, political deals, and sheriff positions kept the hatred burning on both sides. The gunfight at the Corral was just the flashpoint for something much bigger that had been simmering for nearly 2 decades. Number 12. Oatman, Arizona. A little town in the middle of the desert where burros walk around the streets like they own the place. And honestly, they kind of do. These animals descend from the burros that miners used back in the gold rush, and then just abandoned when the mine dried up. But the heavier story is the town's own. The name comes from Olive Oatman, a girl who, in 1851, had her family massacred in an ambush by native people, was captured as a child, and spent years in captivity. Her face was tattooed. When she was finally rescued, she became one of the best-known figures of the Old West. Today, the town survives on tourism, with people feeding burros and walking streets that feel frozen in time since the 1900s. Number 13. Virginia City, Nevada, became famous because of silver. The Comstock lode was one of the biggest mineral discoveries in American history and turned that place into organized chaos. The town sprang up out of nowhere and hit more than 25,000 people in just a few years. The building fronts copied the Victorian style, trying to look civilized, but behind them the reality was something else. The saloons doubled as gambling halls and brothels with no attempt to hide it. The law existed on paper, but in real life justice was decided by the crowd. Lynchings happened over crimes that today would be seen as minor. If someone stole a horse, they could end up hanging from a tree before nightfall. Order depended on the mob's mood, not on a judge. Number 14. In April 1897, something fell from the sky in the small town of Aurora, Texas, and destroyed Judge Proctor's windmill. The local newspaper ran a story that, to this day, nobody has been able to fully prove or completely disprove. According to the article, residents found wreckage from an aircraft and the body of a pilot who clearly wasn't from here. The being was supposedly buried in the local cemetery with honors. Decades later, investigators tried to open the grave, but the town shut it all down. The water well near the crash site was sealed after people got sick from drinking it. This happened 6 years before the Wright brothers even flew. So what exactly was flying over Texas back then? Number 15. The Paiute, a native people of Nevada, passed down a story from generation to generation that a lot of folks dismissed as a myth. They talked about the Siteka, a tribe of red-haired giants who hunted and ate other humans. For centuries, nobody took it seriously. Until in 1911, miners went into Lovelock Cave and found something nobody expected. Along with thousands of artifacts, they came across human remains with reddish hair and bones that pointed to people well above the average height for that time. The part that left researchers without an answer was that the Paiute stories described exactly what was found in that cave. Coincidence, or evidence of something official, history chose to ignore. Number 16. Dodge City had a problem nobody liked to talk about. When they started expanding the town and putting up new buildings, workers kept finding human bones in the middle of the digs. They were bodies buried in a hurry on so-called Boot Hills, the Old West's makeshift graveyards, where they'd toss anyone who died violently. The disturbing part is that a lot of those skeletons had no records at all. Nobody knew who they were, how they died, or who buried them. Some even had bullet marks on the bones. The town literally grew on top of its dead, and a lot of that violence never made it into the history books. Dodge City hid its secrets underground. Number 17. Here's something not many people know. The best-selling hat in the Old West wasn't the wide-brim Stetson you see in the movies. It was the bowler, that hard, round hat you associate with London bankers. Guys like Bat Masterson and Billy the Kid wore bowlers day to day. The Stetson existed, sure, but it was expensive and more common among wealthy ranchers. In western towns, fashion was a mix of everything. Suits shipped in from the east, work boots, worn-out vests, and hats of every kind. Hollywood is the one that decided decades later that a real cowboy wore a Stetson, and we swallowed that story without questioning it. The reality was a lot less glamorous and a lot more interesting than the movies made it look. Number 18. Here's a fact not many people know. In the Old West, the biggest threat didn't come from gunmen or stagecoach robberies. It came from the bathroom. That's right. Towns like Deadwood had no sewer system at all, and outhouses were packed into alleys, shared by dozens of people. The water folks drank often came from wells contaminated by that same waste. The result was devastating. Cholera outbreaks could tear through entire towns in just a few weeks, killing hundreds of people with no doctor able to do much about it. To put it in perspective, your chances of dying from disease in those towns were much higher than getting shot by a revolver. Poor sanitation was the real silent killer of the American West. Number 19. Did you know that in Kentucky, there was a law that banned carrying ice cream in your back pants pocket? It sounds like a joke, but there was a real reason behind it. Horse thieves figured out they could lure animals by putting ice cream in a pocket and just walking. The horse would follow the person on its own, and technically, nobody was stealing anything. As Americans expanded westward, weird laws like that multiplied across different states. In some towns, it was illegal to tie alligators to fire hydrants. In others, you couldn't fish while riding a camel. Each region came up with its own crazy rules to deal with problems that sound ridiculous today, but back then made total sense to the people living there. Number 20. Everyone knows the Long Branch Saloon because of gun smoke, but the place was real. It was in Dodge City, Kansas, and it worked as the busiest hangout in town in the 1870s. All kinds of people came through. Cowboys, gamblers, merchants, and yes, guys like Wyatt Earp. But there's a detail that surprises a lot of people. Dodge City had laws that banned carrying guns inside the town limits. That's right. When you came into town, you had to turn in your revolver. The saloon caught fire and was rebuilt because it made too much money to just shut down. The Old West had more rules than Hollywood wants you to believe. Number 21. In the early 1870s, a family in southeast Kansas opened a small roadside inn. The Benders seemed like ordinary people, but travelers who stopped there just vanished. Nobody suspected anything until an Army colonel went looking for his missing brother, and pressure on the local community started to build. When authorities finally investigated the property, they found a hidden trap door under the house that led to a blood-soaked basement. The bodies were buried in the back orchard with their skulls crushed. The method was always the same. They'd sit the victim with their back to a curtain, and someone behind it would bring the hammer down. Before they could be caught, the Benders disappeared one night and were never found again. To this day, nobody knows what happened to them. Number 22. In November 1896, people in Lodi, California, swore they'd seen something that would change their lives. Two men said they were approached by strange, skinny creatures over 7 feet tall. These beings supposedly tried to kidnap them and take them aboard a craft. The story spread fast through small towns in the American West, where news already arrived, twisted. What's interesting is that this report happened months before the famous wave of mysterious airships that swept across the United States. Nobody ever proved anything, but the question remains, why did so many people in different towns describe such similar things without having any contact with each other? Number 23. During the big storms on the plains, cowboys dealt with a phenomenon that chilled even the bravest ones. A bright, bluish light would appear out of nowhere on the cattle's horns, like each animal had a lit candle on its head. Today, science explains this as St. Elmo's fire, an electrical discharge that happens when the atmosphere is loaded with static electricity. But back then, with no logical explanation available, a lot of cowboys dropped everything and took off at full speed, convinced they were looking at something supernatural. In some more isolated areas, entire herds would show up covered in that ghostly glow, and panic spread faster than fire through dry grass. Some more experienced cowboys already knew the phenomenon and held their ground, but the rookies swore it was the devil's work. Number 24. Everyone thinks a woman in a saloon meant only one thing, but the real story is very different. Alice Ivers, known as Poker Alice, sat at the card tables in Deadwood and cleaned out the pockets of any cowboy who showed up. She wasn't there to serve drinks. She played poker better than most men and built a fortune from it at a time when women could barely even have a bank account. And she wasn't the only one. Plenty of women owned saloons, ran hotels, and managed entire businesses in towns where the law barely existed. The Old West had a lot more tough, capable women than Hollywood ever showed. Did you like these facts? Which one surprised you the most? Comment down below. Send this to that friend who's into real history, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Turn on the bell.